Try calling your internet provider, your insurance company, or an airline, and you'll be hard-pressed to find an actual human to speak to. But at King Arthur Flour, operators are standing by.
King Arthur Flour Baker's Hotline, this is Annabelle. How may I help you?
King Arthur Flour is a baking supply company that's been around for over 200 years. Headquartered in the small town of Norwich, Vermont, they make flour and baking mixes and sell dozens of specialty baking ingredients, from diastatic malt powder to pearl sugar. But what sets this employee-owned company apart is its commitment to its customers, and nowhere is that more evident than in the small office space that houses the company's 13 baker specialists. Yes, a baker's dozen. A team of individuals ready to answer any baking question you might have. It might look like a typical call center. The specialists, who range in age from their late 20s to late 50s and who are largely women, wear headsets and they sit in cubicles. They have a quota for calls, about 10 an hour, set in order to keep up with demand. During an average day, calls to the baker's hotline, which are free, number around 300 to 400. During the holidays, when the call center's hours expand, that number jumps to between 500 and 800 calls per day. Though there's no formal training for baker specialists, most come to the job with some background in baking, a skill that's further honed through the free baking classes offered as a perk to employees. The job is part tactical, helping people understand why their bread has failed or how to convert a cake recipe to high altitude, but it's emotional too. I talked to Annabelle Nicholson, who's been a baking specialist at King Arthur for 2 years. The most common question we get, she said, is about sourdough starters. People are always wondering if they've killed their starters. Annabelle explains that more complicated questions about sourdough are routed to Barb, who's been a baker specialist for 3 years and has developed a reputation as the house expert on the subject. Annabelle says, really though, the majority of what we do is coddling and reassuring. We try and match the tone of our callers, and we try to give them suggestions for how to move forward. The center has many repeat callers, some of whom ask for baker specialists by name. Though Annabelle says they're not supposed to route calls to specific specialists, occasionally they break the rules. You've developed a relationship with a caller, and they trust you. She goes on to tell me the story of a caller who's having problems with a family recipe for a Czech-style pastry. Annabelle spent 45 minutes on the phone with this woman, helping her troubleshoot the recipe. A few weeks later, a 3-page handwritten letter of thanks arrived, along with a 4-page handwritten pastry recipe, all tucked into a page protector. Says Annabelle, sometimes you make a connection that does not end when you hang up. When I talked to the baker specialist, I heard lots of stories. They've had their share of frustrated bakers, of course, and panicked bakers, but it's safe to say that the bulk of the calls they field are mundane requests, like bakers wondering how to make a gluten-free version of something. But one story stuck with me, and I wanted to share it with you. This story comes from a baker specialist named Maggie, who's been with the company for 5 years. Says Maggie, almost a year ago, I had the most beautiful conversation with an older gentleman from Virginia that had me in tears by the end. We chatted for about 10 minutes, trying to troubleshoot a dinner roll recipe that he had. We went through all the usual sticking points, but just couldn't figure out what was happening. He was very patient, but finally I suggested that maybe we find another recipe for him to try. He took a deep breath and then explained that he recently lost his wife of 59 years. He had decided to work through her recipe box, recreating each of her dinners and baked goods that they had shared together. And this, the dinner rolls, was the last one. It was his favorite. By this time, says Maggie, she's got her head in her hands, trying not to ugly cry too loudly, while he very calmly says that sometimes memories are all that you have, but that memories can be beautiful. We talked for another 10 to 15 minutes, and he thanked me graciously for helping an old man learn new tricks. I got off the phone, and I put together a giant packet of everything I could find on our blog about bread and dinner rolls, threw in a coupon, and wrote him a note that didn't even touch the surface of my feelings at the time. I popped it in the mail, but have never heard back from him. He's the story I tell when people ask me if I like working on the hotline.